You walk out of the room to grab something from the kitchen. 30 seconds later, your 6-month-old is screaming like you've disappeared from the planet. Most parents chalk it up to clinginess, or maybe the baby just wanting attention. But neuroscientists studying infant brain development have discovered something that changes everything we thought we understood about what's happening in that moment. And it's not what you think. For a baby under 4 months old, when you leave the room, you genuinely cease to exist. Not metaphorically, actually. Their brain hasn't developed the neural architecture to hold the concept that things continue existing when they're not visible. Researchers call this object permanence, and without it, your absence isn't scary or sad. It's just nothing. You're gone the same way a turned-off television is gone. No memory, no awareness, no you. But something extraordinary happens between 4 and 9 months. The baby's hippocampus, the brain structure responsible for memory formation, starts building new pathways. Working memory expands. And suddenly, for the first time in their life, when you walk through that doorway, they can hold an image of you in their mind, which sounds beautiful until you realize what it actually means. Now, when you leave, they know you exist somewhere. They just have zero concept of where, why, or if you're coming back. Time doesn't exist for them yet. You could be gone for 30 seconds or 30 years, as far as their brain can process. That's the neurological reality behind what we casually call separation anxiety. And it's not a behavioral quirk. It's a cognitive earthquake. Research published across 47 different studies measured cortisol levels in infants during separation from their primary caregiver. Cortisol is your stress hormone, the chemical your brain releases when it perceives danger. In babies aged 3 to 18 months, separation was the only stressor that consistently triggered measurable cortisol spikes. Not loud noises, not unfamiliar faces, just you leaving. And here's what makes this even more intense. The brain structures lighting up during these separations aren't just about memory. Neuroimaging studies identified the amygdala, your fear center, showing increased activation when babies experience caregiver absence. But there's another structure involved that researchers didn't expect: the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis. This region doesn't handle immediate fear. It processes sustained anxiety, the kind that lingers, the kind that says something is wrong and it's not getting better. So when your baby screams as you walk away, their brain is genuinely experiencing a threat response. Not because they're manipulative or spoiled, because their neural hardware is sophisticated enough to know you exist, but not developed enough to understand you're coming back. But the part nobody talks about, the part that flips this entire understanding on its head, is what happens next. Because that cortisol spike, that amygdala activation, that whole stress response, it doesn't affect every baby the same way. Some infants show massive elevations, others barely register a change. And the variable that determines which category your baby falls into has nothing to do with temperament or genetics. It's about what happens during the separation itself. And when researchers started isolating that variable, what they discovered didn't just explain separation anxiety. It revealed how infant brains actually build the capacity to handle stress for the rest of their lives. A laboratory experiment at MIT ran a controlled test. They had mothers leave their babies with unfamiliar babysitters for 30 minutes. Half the babysitters were instructed to be minimally responsive, present, safe, but emotionally flat, not particularly engaging or attentive. The other half were trained to be actively responsive, talking, playing, mirroring the baby's emotional cues, staying connected even though mom wasn't there. Blood samples measured cortisol before, during, and after. The babies with unresponsive caregivers showed significant stress hormone elevation that lasted well beyond the separation period itself. The babies with responsive caregivers showed barely any cortisol increase at all. Same separation, same duration, completely different neurological experience. What this tells us is that separation itself isn't the problem. The problem is separation without responsive connection to replace what's missing. Your baby's brain is looking for regulation, for someone to help process the stress of your absence. And when they find it, their system stabilizes. When they don't, the alarm keeps ringing. This is what builds lifelong stress architecture. Infants who repeatedly experience separation with inadequate emotional support develop hyperactive stress responses that persist into childhood and beyond. But babies who experience separation with consistent, attuned caregiving learn something completely different. They learn that stress is manageable, that help exists, that the world is ultimately safe even when it's temporarily uncomfortable. And here's what makes this so critical. The structures being shaped during these early separations, the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, the amygdala, these are the exact brain regions responsible for emotional regulation in adulthood. The Bucharest Early Intervention Project tracked children raised in Romanian orphanages, where caregiver separations were constant and responses were minimal. These children showed measurable differences in brain structure and function compared to children raised in stable homes. But the children moved into responsive foster care before age 2. Their brain development normalized. The window is wide open in infancy, which means the impact of how you handle separations right now is permanent. So what do you actually do with this information? Make your départ tears predictable. Say where you're going and that you're coming back, even if they can't understand the words yet. When you return, acknowledge it. Your voice from the next room acts as a neural bridge, proof that you still exist, even when you're not visible. Over hundreds of repetitions, their hippocampus starts encoding a new pattern. Separation is temporary. Return is reliable. The world is consistent. You're not just soothing a crying baby. You're programming their brain's fundamental assumptions about safety, predictability, and whether other people can be trusted to help when things feel wrong. Every single time you leave the room and come back, you're writing code that will run for decades. That's not parenting advice. That's neuroscience. And now you know exactly what's happening in that little brain the moment you walk through the door. So the next time your baby loses it because you stepped into the hallway, remember what's actually going on. Their brain is reaching across space, trying to hold on to you with neural pathways that are still under construction. And how you respond right now in these seemingly small everyday moments is building the architecture they'll use to handle every stressful situation for the rest of their life. That's not pressure. That's just what those 30 seconds actually mean.